Hi guys, welcome to the Advanced Python YouTube channel. Here is my first YouTube video which will talk you through and solve the bike tour problem. This problem has been taken from Google Kickstart from 2019 and was actually the first question I ever did to begin my competitive coding career. Therefore, I have chosen it for my first YouTube video. Without further ado, let's get into the details of the problem. So Lee has planned a bike tour through the mountains of Switzerland. His tour consists of n checkpoints numbered 1 to n in the order that he will visit them. The ith checkpoint has a height hi. A checkpoint's a peak if it's not the first or the nth checkpoint, and the height of the checkpoint is strictly greater than the one before it and the one after it. Help Lee find the number of peaks. Although this is quite a simple problem, I still think it's very important for us to use abstraction on it. This will allow us to remove any unnecessary details from the problem, because whether a person is called Lee or Tom, it will not have an impact on our code and will just clutter the problem up. This is what I got. You have n checkpoints labelled 1 to n. The ith checkpoint has a height hi. A checkpoint is a peak if it's not the first or the last, and the height is strictly greater than the one before it and the one after it. Find the number of peaks. Hopefully, by abstracting it, it becomes easier to code and more logical. Moving on, we have the structure of the input and how it wants us to output our answer. This is quite standard in the way that it is set out. We are told that the first line will be an integer t, and then t test cases will follow. Each test case will begin with n, and then n integers on the next line. In terms of outputs, we are told it is wanted in a very specific form, which is standard to almost every single coding problem. Next, we can look at the test cases. We are given 4, and I invite you to pause the video now and look through them so you can fully understand what the code needs to do. As a final note, before beginning with the coding, here is a frame that I use for most of the coding problems, where t is the number of test cases given at the beginning, and the output is formatted in a very specific way, which is the same for every single coding problem. Now let's jump to the coding. Welcome to the coding. So here I am with my frame in my IDE. I've chosen PyCharm as my IDE, but feel free to use any IDE you're comfortable with. The first thing we need to do is get that input. As we are told in the question, and as you should be able to see on the right, the first thing we will need to do is get n, which is an integer. We can do this as such in Python, not very complicated. However, next we need to get an array of integers in. So, there are many different options for doing this, however I prefer to do mine in this fashion. So, all this does is, takes the input, splits into a list, and then runs a for loop here to convert every item into an integer. Quite simple. You can also do this in a variety of different methods, as I've said, including one of the most common ones is using a map to convert them all into integers. So now we have all the inputs, it's time to code the main problem. The first thing we need to do is create a total variable which holds a number of peaks which can be initialized to 0, because if there are no peaks, we want to print out 0 peaks. So now we have to run a for loop through the array to find the number of peaks. So for hill in range 1, n minus 1. Our range here may seem a bit obscure, however, it's being used to make sure that the first and the last checkpoints, which cannot be peaks, will not be run through. So now we have the for loop. When we come on to each checkpoint, what do we need to know? We need to know the current height, the previous height, and the one after. So to work these out, we can just index the array. So array hill equals array hill minus 1 to get the one before, and it equals array hill plus 1. So now we have all the data. Now we need to do some comparisons. So first we need to say if the height of the current hill is greater than the height of the one before it. And we also need to say if the height of the current hill is greater than the one after it, then we have a peak. So what does that mean for our code? So we can't just print out we have a peak here because there will be many. So we need to increment the total variable. Total plus equals 1. And now we are done with our code. So now we need to run some test cases to make sure our code works before we start to fine tune some of the details and make our code the finished product. So I'll click run. I'll expand this so you guys can see. So we'll start off with T of 3. So we'll have 3 test cases. And the first one will have 3 integers. We'll make it 1, 4, and 1. Should only be 1 peak. Case 1 is 1. That's good. Next we do 7, length 7. I'm just put some random numbers into there. We get 3, 1, 6, and 5 would be our peaks. Now we can run 4, 2, 1, 2, and 4. And you can see the 0 peaks there. So our code works, which is very good. Now we can move on to fine tuning the code. So this is just picking for details, but can make our code much faster. The first thing that I notice is this if statement can be written in one statement rather than having 2 separate statements. So you have current in the middle and is greater than the one after it and is greater than the one before it. Just a compound statement rather than 2 separate statements. And now what you can notice is all these are repeated twice. So what we could do is take this and paste it in here. This would save our code. We're going to save these every single time in memory and just using them directly once they've been found. So we just put these in here and we delete these. Check it still makes sense, you've not made any index errors, and that seems good. So now that we've refined the code, we can run through some final test cases to make sure that our code still works. So I'll just press run again. This would be a good opportunity to go back to the test cases given in the question and making sure that those work with your code, but I'm quite confident, so I'll just try with some test cases. There should be 2. Our code works and we're happy. The code is all done. So now the final thing to do, which you guys can do as well, is to go onto the Google Kickstart website, round B 2020, submit your answer. I got an S for successful, 2 ticks, 12 points. Good luck. Hope you liked the video. Please subscribe and share with friends.